Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Rachel and I am knitting. Not right now, but most of the time, and I have been knitting, so I'll tell you all about it. Today's video is the next installment of my FO Diary series, or Finished Object Diary series, which is a video series where I tell you all about my making process with a recently finished item. In this case, the Kal Cardigan by Claire Jackson of Perfectly Knotted. I'm going to tell you all about my making process, obstacles I encountered, how I overcame them, and ultimately whether or not I would recommend this pattern for you. So if that sounds interesting to you, go ahead and keep watching, and if you'd like to make sure you don't miss any future FO diaries, go ahead and click that subscribe button. All right, let's get into it. I have a lot of notes on the Kal Cardigan tell you about. So yeah, I sat down to write down all of my thoughts and feelings, all of my stats, kind of the timeline of my process making this garment, and I almost have 2 full pages of notes. So there's a lot to unpack, but I want to start with some stats / an overview of the pattern. So surely if you've been watching my channel, you may already be familiar with the Kal Cardigan, but if you're not, let me just introduce you. So this is the Kal Cardigan designed by Claire Jackson, as I've mentioned. Her handle on Instagram and I believe across social media platforms and Ravelry is Perfectly Knotted. So you can find her patterns under that handle. This is written for a worsted weight fabric. In the sample that Claire has for the pattern, she uses a DK weight yarn held with a Surrey lace weight yarn to make a worsted weight fabric. So you could use a DK held with a Surrey, or you could do what I've done and used 1 strand of worsted weight yarn. So worsted weight fabric, however you come by that fabric, whether that is by holding multiple strands together to get that weight, or you hold a single strand of worsted weight. So I knit mine up in Malabrigo Rios in the colorway Pisces. As far as I understand it, this is a limited edition color, so I'm very glad that I have, frankly, 2 sweater quantities in my stash. This I used 7 skeins for, and I have 5 skeins remaining on my yarn wall. Obviously, I can't speak to what my yardage stats would have ended up being if I had done the recommended DK weight held with a lace weight, but on the pattern page, even before you purchase the pattern, you can see that Claire notes for the yardage estimates, there's a separate estimate for the DK weight and a separate estimate for the Surrey weight. And then she also notes that if you're opting to use 1 strand of worsted weight, to follow the DK weight estimate. And I will tell you that that's pretty spot on. In the pattern, it recommends, for my size, I knit size 6, it recommends 1,340 yards of DK weight, and therefore worsted weight if you're just using worsted weight. I ended up using 1,318.8 yards. So if I had followed the DK weight estimate for yardage when purchasing yarn, which I did, that rang true for what I ended up using in my worsted weight yarn. Okay, so I'm getting a little sidetracked. Let's get back to the stats of the pattern. The Kal Cardigan is written for 9 sizes, ranging from a finished bust circumference of 36 inches to 76 inches. And it's written for approximately 20 to 30% of positive ease, and that percentage changes depending on the size you're making. The percentage of ease goes down towards the 20% range if you're knitting a larger size, and it's more towards, well, it's more in between the 20 to 30% range on the lower sizes of the 9 size range. But it is written to be quite oversized. So for me, knitting a size 6, I have anywhere from a 50 inch to a 52 inch bust depending on the day. So for me, that would translate to approximately 10¼ inches of positive ease, making size 6. Okay, so yes, it's written also for size 8 needles, but I knit mine on size 7 needles. And I'll talk a little bit more about my gauge as we get further into the FO diary. But there's just your overview. Here we have the yarn that is called for, also subs you can make like I did, the size range, and the needle size that it calls for. Some other things that you might want to know about the pattern that you are not able to see really before you purchase it that I think are really nice touches. Each size of this pattern is color coded, meaning the numbers that correspond to size 1 are all in the same color. Size 2, all the same color. Size 4, and you know, all the sizes have their own color. Size 4 is purple. That's the size I initially cast on, but I ended up making a size 6. I'll get into that in a minute. But that's a really nice touch, I think. Sometimes it's difficult to keep track of which number corresponds to the size you're making because, especially for patterns that are size inclusive, there are a lot of different numbers to choose from. Like 9 sizes, that's 9 sets of numbers for any given set of instructions along the pattern. It's very easy to lose track of which number in the queue of 9 numbers you're supposed to follow. So having each of the sizes color coded, I think, is a really nice touch. And I believe that this is consistent throughout Claire's pattern library. I haven't seen all of her patterns, but as far as I know, this is a consistent style choice that Claire has in her pattern PDFs. And I think that's really, really nice and helpful. Also, something that you may want to know about this pattern that you're not able to see before purchasing it is that the pattern does have a schematic, which is good, but the schematic is lacking, in my opinion, a very crucial measurement. This is a new revelation to me in my making process. It does not include a measurement from shoulder seam to the armpit, which I have recently discovered is absolutely vital for me. It's vital information for me to have to be successful in my making practice. So although the Kal Cardigan does have a schematic, I wish that it had that additional measurement, which I'll talk about a little bit more. Now, last in the stats / overview of things you may want to know is that there is a gauge of 18 stitches and 23 rows over 4 inches. So that's the pattern gauge. It's noted in the pattern that if you hit stitch gauge but not row gauge, to move forward with the needle size that you hit stitch gauge on, and then you can adjust your length accordingly with row gauge. So something important to keep in mind. Now that we've gone over the stats and the general overview of the pattern, I'd like now to bring you along for the journey of my making process. So I made this garment in 1 month, a little less than 1 month actually. I swatched on April 28th, I cast on April 30th, and I cast off on May 29th. So I guess longer than a month if you include the swatching in that timeline, but I really count casting on as like the starting line. Maybe I should rethink that because swatching really, well, I have a lot of thoughts about swatching after knitting this, so I'll just stick to that. Yeah, less than a month from April 30th to May 29th. This was knit, and I'll tell you that this was not a smooth process. There was an immense amount of frogging and an immense amount of reknitting. And I'll give you a spoiler. If you are not already aware, I mentioned this in this week's podcast that went live yesterday, or no, 2 days ago on June 28th. June 18th, what are numbers? There, whatever, okay. Anyway, recently I announced that I'm going to frog this. I'm going to frog this garment. I'm not going to keep this in my wardrobe. I will be frogging it and reusing the yarn at a later date. When will that happen? I don't know. All I know is it's going to happen. That's my plan. So that can give you a glimpse into what my making process was, but I'll walk you through it nonetheless. So buckle up and let's get started. I should also note that this timeline with maybe a bit more detail is available on my Ravelry project page for this cardigan. I'm trying to be very intentional and very consistent in my use of Ravelry project notes because I want that to be a reference point for me to look back on when I see what I liked or didn't like about certain patterns. If I knit them again, what I would change, things like that. It's like a historical record for me. That's how I'm viewing it. All right, okay, so on April 28th, I made my first swatch, and I believe my second swatch. Yeah, I swatched twice for this project. One in Malabrigo Pisces and another in a different shade of Malabrigo Rios, because I didn't want to use up all my Pisces. I wanted to save it for an actual garment. So I did swatch twice, once on size 8 needles as called for in the pattern, and once on size 7 needles. Oh, I didn't swatch on size 8 at all. I swatched on size 6 because I am typically a looser knitter, so I guess I was trying to preemptively address that by going down 2 needle sizes for my swatch. That was 20 stitches over 30 rows, but since the pattern calls for 18 stitches, I sized up a needle and I re-swatched on size 7. Okay, so my swatch on size 7 had 17 stitches and 28 rows over 4 inches, which I'll talk a little bit about swatching shortly, but this is just a roller coaster of this project with gauge and swatching. But anyway, all that to say, by April 30th, I had at least some data on my gauge, and I moved forward knitting this on a size 7. So I cast on April 30th. By May 2nd, I had nearly 1 full skein knit up. So what I did was I put the project on hollow silicone tubing and I wet blocked it. Basically, I was under the impression, hold on, my foot fell asleep and it's now waking up and it's just absolutely excruciating with sensitivity. Hold on. Okay, I think I'm gonna survive. So that was May 2nd. I wet blocked it. I was under the impression that if I knit nearly a skein's worth of fabric and I wet blocked it, I would have an accurate impression of what my gauge was, because I had been having a lot of issues with gauge over the course of the past few months. If you've been following me on Instagram or on here on YouTube, you will know the woes that I've experienced, the ups and downs of gauge and fit. Not everything goes how I want it to go, is the too long didn't read of that revelation. So I knit a skein as a swatch. After I had that dry and I measured it, I believed my gauge to be 15 3/4 stitches, so 15.75 stitches over 4 inches. Okay, so I moved forward with that knowledge. On May 6th, I joined a new skein. On May 7th, the next day, I decided that the join between the first skein and the second skein was not blended enough. Like they were too disparate, so I frogged back like a whole panels worth to go back and alternate skeins to blend the join a little bit more. You can kind of see the join still. This up here is the first skein, this down here is the second skein. These are not cohesive, but certainly it looks better than it did that first go around. About a week later, on May 15th, I frogged back again because I had finished the front 2 panels and the back panel. I joined underneath the armpit. I tried it on. I determined the armholes were not deep enough. So I frogged back not only to the armpit join, but all the way to the yoke, because I determined, with the help of people commenting on my podcast, that the size I was making was too small. Yeah, I had been making the size 4. So I frogged back to the raglan increases and I increased to the stitch count of size 6. Okay, so yeah, size 6 ends up being, what's the finished bust measurement of size 6? 60 inches. So anywhere from 8 to 10 inches of positive ease. That's not the amount of ease that I prefer. It's not the amount of ease that I like, but based on my try-ons and my gauge after my first skein had been wet blocked, I figured that the size 6 would be what it needed to be. So anyway, I started knitting size 6. By May 27th, I was halfway through the body. By May 28th, I had finished the body and picked up the sleeves. I initially picked up the sleeves at a 2 stitches for every 3 rows pickup rate, which in my mind is kind of the standard. That gives a really nice armhole look. It's not like too cramped and condensed with the number of stitches you're picking up. Equally, it's not too stretched out. But I had far too few stitches for my sleeve, and the sleeve, I knit a few rows and it was just far too tight. I hated the look of it, and I was really feeling defeated. I felt at a loss because I thought, what am I supposed to do? So then I tried to pick up 3 stitches every 4 rows pickup rate, which is in my mind still reasonable, still one of the standard pickup rates for a nice looking sleeve, and I still had far too few stitches. It just wasn't working. So I was talking to Leslie about this. She's knit the Kal Cardigan multiple times. Her finished objects look amazing, and that's what I wanted for myself. So I was belly aching to her about this and the obstacle I was facing. How am I going to do this? Do I have to frog the whole body and extend the armhole holes? Like, that feels really defeating after I worked so hard to finish the body. She let me know she had a similar issue, and she did a pickup rate of 7 stitches out of 8 rows. So it's just one of those things where you, like, in my mind, I know that I could have changed the pickup rate to have a sleeve circumference that worked for me. But in my mind, picking up 7 stitches out of 8 rows, like that, in my mind, that's heinous. You can't do that. That's not, like, no way should you do that. But having Leslie tell me, this is possible, you can do it, you won't go to jail, I was like, oh, of course. So that's what I did. I picked up 7 stitches out of 8 rows, and that got me the stitch count listed in the pattern for sleeves. Ta-da! Okay, but I'll tell you, I don't like the look of these sleeves. I don't like them. I just don't. I think that there's just too many stitches. Look at this color pooling also. There's just too many stitches here for, I don't know. It just, like, it's clear to me when I'm looking at this garment and this fabric that the armhole is too small for the circumference of this sleeve. Okay, now my gauge is different than the pattern gauge in terms of stitch count and row count. However, I knit the rows as listed in the pattern. I didn't add length to the panels for the armhole. So even though my gauge is off, meaning this armhole is shallower than is written in the pattern for it to be, the rows and the rows of the panels and the stitches of the arm are the same as in the pattern. So that's something I don't like about how this pattern is written, is the pickup rate required for the sleeves. To me, 7 stitches out of 8 rows is just too, that pickup rate is a little too wild for me. So it's not my preference. I don't enjoy that. Not my preference. But anyway, that was on May 28th. I picked up the sleeves, and by May 29th, I cast off. I did go down 2 needle sizes. I knit the sleeve cuffs on a US size 5. This pattern is written for 1 size of needles throughout the whole thing, which is really nice. You don't have to, keep track of multiple needle sizes to complete this pattern, but I did opt to go down a few needle sizes because by the time I got the length of the sleeve that I wanted, the opening of the armhole was still just a little bit too big for my preference, and I wanted to cinch it up, but I didn't really want to continue decreasing, so I just went down 2 needle sizes for the cuff, and then I did a sewn bind off and called it a day. So that's the process. A lot can be done in a month. it turns out. Even if you basically are frogging and reknitting this like 3 different times. I mean, not in its entirety, of course, but I got very far multiple times only to frog back to the yoke. So I feel like if I had not been frogging and reknitting, frogging and reknitting, frogging and reknitting, this could have been done in a considerably shorter time frame. Okay, so now let's talk about gauge. I'm confused. I'm confused by this, honestly, by my gauge knitting this pattern. Depending on where I measure on this garment, the gauge is different. If I measure back here on the yoke, it is about 16.5 stitches over 4 inches. If I measure halfway down the back, it's about 14.5 stitches over 4 inches. And if I measure down at the bottom of the back, right before ribbing, it's 15.5 inches or stitches over 4 inches. So what in the world? For row gauge, I'm at about 30 to 32 rows over 4 inches, depending on where I'm measuring. So that's confusing. But also, when I lay this garment flat, where the seams are the center of the armholes, the circumference, or like, you know, the finished bust circumference of this cardigan is 63 inches. Okay, so if I do the math with the finished measurements, because this doesn't just naturally close when it's laying flat or when it's on my body. So like the natural unbuttoned circumference of this is 63 inches. There is a gap down the middle where the 2 front panels do not join, do not overlap. So that's where my measurement is. But if I factor in that finished circumference with the stitch count of the pattern, that means that my stitch gauge is 17.84 stitches over 4 inches, which is pretty darn close to the 18 stitches over 4 inches as listed in the pattern. So I'm thinking that the difference from what I measure, like when I put my 6-inch ruler on my garment when it's laying flat and I measure how many stitches over 4 inches in multiple different locations, that is one gauge measurement or multiple gauge measurement, depending on where I'm measuring, versus taking one of these to measure across from armpit to armpit. Like, how is that different? Maybe someone can help me understand in the comments. Like, it seems very, like, that shouldn't be a discrepancy that's happening. So why is that happening? What like foundational piece of human existence is not clicking in my brain? I don't know. But yeah, either way, this is quite oversized on me. It ended up being an 11 to 13 inch positive ease, and that's not what I like. It's not what I like on my body. So yeah, it's fraught. It's fraught and it's confusing. So yeah, I'm feeling a little at a loss for words because I have so many thoughts on this pattern and my experience knitting this pattern, but also I don't know where the line is between this pattern is just not what I want for my body, to I messed up knitting this pattern, to there are oversights or issues in the pattern itself. I feel like it's a combination of all 3 of those things, but I don't know which of the 3 is the more weighty of those variables, if that makes sense. But I do know that there are some things that I wish were different in this pattern for it to really work for my body. Before I really get into talking about the things that I wish were different, I just want us to be on the same page. If you've been watching, you know I'm an anxious person, and I want this to be taken in the spirit it is given. Just because I am disappointed in the final result of this project does not mean that it would be a bad project for you to make. But I do have opinions about this pattern and things that I wish were different, so I guess I should tell you what those are. But I do want to add a disclaimer to tell you that these are my preferences. They don't have to be yours. They don't have to be another person's. They are just my opinions about what I made for my body and things that I wish were different and that I will keep in mind when making items moving forward. So just keep that in mind. These are my thoughts. They don't have to be your thoughts. If you agree with me, awesome. If you disagree with me, awesome. And I hope that you make something that you enjoy on your body. This just wasn't it for me. The first thing that I wish was different is just a little bit more detailed instruction in one section of the pattern. And this is actually unrelated to my fit issues. This is just something that I would have liked a little bit more hand holding on. Basically, the way that this pattern is constructed is you cast on at the back of the neck and then you expand to make the yoke. But with this button band, it's a brioche button band, so you start with that. There's a piece of the pattern where you're joining the left section. You're joining two pieces of brioche. I wish that there had been a little bit more explanation of where to pick up stitches to join and to expand that back part of the neckband, because it took me a few tries to get the brioche in alignment, and I'll show you a photo here of my attempts that were misaligned. Just like a photo to help you see where to pick up your stitches, I think would have been great. More detailed schematic, as I've mentioned earlier. I really think designers need to start adding the shoulder seam to the armpit schematic, especially with something like this where the construction, the shoulder seam is not hitting right at your shoulder. So it's really important, I feel, to have that included in the schematic. I think that is, you know, not a difficult addition, and I hope that I see more designers adding that to their schematics if they don't already. I think it's so important, especially for plus sizes. Another thing that I wish were different, and that if I make this pattern again, I'll modify. Not only will I modify this, but I'll modify the size I make, which I guess I'll tell you after. But relating to the gap that I mentioned, where this does not naturally overlap, certainly if I had buttons, it would. I didn't add buttonholes, but I think that what I would do differently knitting this is obviously size down, because I do not like this fit on my body, but I would add more of the neck increases to make more of a V-neck instead of continuing to add shoulder increases. The shoulder increases make the garment, the armhole, sit so far down your arm. For reference, this is the inside of my elbow right here, whereas this is where the armhole is. I really don't like that. And again, my gauge is fraught. You know, if I'm measuring from armpit to armpit, I basically am on gauge, but when I measure the actual garment, my gauge is disparate, so help me understand what's going on there. But yeah, am I not understanding gauge, or is the sample, like, I'm wondering if maybe the sample was measured from armpit to armpit and then gauge was calculated off that, or was gauge calculated by measuring on the actual fabric, a 4-inch section? I don't know. Like, that's a question I have. But I think more V-neck increases as opposed to raglan increases to make it so this is a closed cardigan without needing all of this excess ease. Now, that changes the fit of the design as intended. So it would be a modification. I'm not saying the design as intended needs to change, because some people prefer this fit. I'm just not one of them. So that's what I would personally do if I were knitting this again, because this excessive positive ease is just not for me. Okay, now let's talk about what I learned when knitting this, or what process I don't know, want to implement with future makes, things that I was pondering as I was making it. The first is that I now know when knitting on a size 7 needle. My preferred stitch count for a worsted weight cardigan, or I guess probably pullover too, is going to be in the 230 to 260 stitch count range. The stitch count for size 6 is just far too much for my preference. So I did learn that I am going to go for the size that has a stitch count in that range for worsted weight garments moving forward when knit on a size 7. I've also learned that gauge changes. Like, I have a lot of thoughts on this. I have seen, as I'm sure you have, a lot of content about the importance of swatching. And if you don't swatch and your garment doesn't fit, too bad, so sad, you made your bed and now you have to lie in it. With kindness, I want to say, shut up. That's so frustrating to hear. Like, you're gonna tell me that my garment doesn't fit the way that I wanted it to fit because I didn't swatch? Wrong. I did swatch. I swatched a whole skein's worth. And I've done this multiple times on multiple projects. And, you know, like, let's give the benefit of the doubt to the people who are saying swatch or else, and say, you know, you're right, and it's my fault. I'm doing something wrong. Maybe that is the reason this is happening. Probably. I don't know. I haven't investigated it fully yet. I don't even know how to go about that. But I'm sorry. I did my due diligence. I swatched. Not only did I make actual swatches, 2 of them, I also treated the project as a swatch and wet blocked it after knitting a whole skein up. You're going to tell me that my garment doesn't fit how I want it to fit because I didn't do the work? Wrong, wrong, wrong. I did the work. I fought the good fight. And what did it get me? A garment that I am going to frog. So just, you know, put that in your garden and water it. Think about it. Maybe someone is doing the pre-work and there are still some issues happening. Like, okay, you're gonna knit a 4x4 swatch and tell me that you know all you need to know about your pattern moving forward? Do you think me an automaton, a robot without feelings? A robot whose gauge doesn't change and fluctuate during the course of knitting a garment? That's a quote from Jane Eyre, paraphrased and added some knitting terminology in there. Have to use my doctorate in Victorian literature somehow. Anyway, geez Louise, makes me feel really bad about myself. So, I don't know, think twice before you make that kind of content, I guess. I mean, I don't know, do what you want, but man, it's frustrating because I swatched a lot, probably more than the average person. And yet still, I'm disappointed with the end result. Yeah, frustrating. So anyway, stop telling people to swatch. Let them live their lives and just think about it a little bit. So yeah, that was something I was pondering. Also, I was pondering the value of schematics. As I've said multiple times at this point, there has to be a shoulder seam to armpit measurement included in the schematic. Just add it. People, just add it there. I also learned that I need to be more diligent myself about studying project photos. If a project looks good in the sample photo, amazing, congratulations. But is the person modeling the sample in the sample photo, do they have the same body type that I do? Because if they don't, I am not getting an accurate view of how this garment may look on me. Okay, so, you know, 10 inches of positive ease may look great on a smaller size, or the smaller size, I should say rather, may make a smaller size feel great because, you know, looking great is subjective, of course. I almost said objective, but that's not what I mean. But if it's that much positive ease on a larger size, that totally changes the I don't know, the vibe of the piece. It's not the same across sizes. And yeah, so that's what I was pondering. I need to be more diligent about doing my research on how this pattern looks on people with body types similar to my own. I also was pondering product versus process knitting. I've learned that I am probably mostly a product knitter. Like, I do want my knitted piece to be wearable and be functional at the end of my process of knitting it. I've seen people say that, you know, if you knit something and then you have to frog it again, it's okay because you love knitting. And yes, that's true, but I don't want to have to reknit something multiple times to get what I want to get. I want to know what I'm doing and know that I'll be satisfied at the end of it. Which leads me to my next point. Size inclusivity is complicated and nuanced. I've been thinking about Mackenzie, M to the third on Instagram. She posted one of her recently finished objects a little while ago, the Yoon sweater by November Knits. And Mackenzie talked in her post about what she looks for in an oversized garment for her body, which is a plus size body. And she mentioned having a fitted yoke, so there's not all this extra fabric between the arm and the bust. So having a yoke that fits, but then having room in the sleeves and then room in the body for hips. I think that's probably a recipe that I'm going to look for moving forward and that I'm going to consider when knitting for my body, just because a pattern has size inclusive measurements does not mean that it's going to be exactly what I'm looking for my plus size body. So I just need to be more mindful of that. Which leads me to my next point. This is going to just, don't get mad. Take this in the spirit that it is given. We have to be understanding of people making what works for them and what they want to make. It's fraught, it's nuanced, it's complicated. But I think as a community, we can be a little bit more understanding of people making what they have in their library, what patterns speak to them, and what they want to make. I kind of wish that I had made the champagne cardigan by Petite Knit for this pattern because I've already made it, and since for whatever reason against my will I'm in this era where I'm essentially knitting a garment as a swatch, I feel like the champagne cardigan has issues. There are definite fit issues. For whatever reason, Petite Knit thinks that if you're plus size, then your armpit is the same, it's parallel to your belly button. That's obviously not true. But I've knit that pattern before. I know how to modify it to fit my body, to work with my body. And I wish that I had not spent a month making a pattern that I will ultimately frog, and instead invested that time to modify an existing pattern I've made to make it work for me. It's no secret that Petite Knit has a lot of ire, or has churned up a lot of ire towards her and her pattern portfolio. And you know, whether you think that is fair or not is not really my point. My point more so is that, let's say I knit the champagne cardigan by Petite Knit with this yarn. The anxiety in my body is telling me people will hate you, people will think you're a fraud, people will think you're a jerk. When in reality, I don't think that way towards other people when they knit Petite Knit patterns. I just think that they chose a pattern that spoke to them and worked for them, and that's their choice. That's okay. I don't know. I want us to be in the practice of assuming the best in people as opposed to the worst. And maybe if you see someone knitting a pattern that's not size inclusive, their motivation probably is not, I hate fat people and I want to promote fat phobia. Maybe their motivation is to invest their time into making a pattern they know will work for them, or that they've made before, or is a style they've made before, or whatever. I don't know. This makes me so anxious to talk about because I really don't want to be misunderstood. I don't want to come across as saying that size inclusivity doesn't matter. It absolutely does. And yet, it's also true that there's nuance to it. And, you know, there's nuance to it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So, what do you think? what would you have done? And what do you think I should do when I harvest this yarn? I would love if you let me know. Yeah, so those are my thoughts. A couple other things that I should tell you is I have spoken with Claire Jackson of Perfectly Knotted, the designer of this pattern. I let her know, hey, I'm going to be doing an FO diary. Do you want my feedback ahead of time? I don't want to step on toes. I don't know. It's weird to reach out to someone and say, do you want to know the problems I had? But Claire's great. And she said, yeah, I'd love feedback. You know, feedback isn't as prevalent after a pattern launches. So let me know. I told her about the schematic. I told her about the arm versus the ease of the arm versus the ease of the body. And she was really receptive. She said that having more info in the schematic is definitely something she wants to implement moving forward. So maybe there will be a Kal Cardigan update. I don't know, but hopefully it will be in patterns moving forward. And if you're a pattern designer watching this, I hope that you, if nothing else, the takeaway is please, please, please add a measurement from shoulder seam to armpit. It is so helpful. So helpful. Yeah. Oh, another thing about this pattern, it's $15 Canadian, 15 Canadian dollars. How do you say that currency? I don't know. There's also a pay what you can or pay what you want, whatever that is called, that system. So you can use codes for a certain tier of discount if that is your preference. It's listed on the pattern page in Ravelry. So I hope that's helpful. I hope you don't think I'm a jerk. I'm just telling you what my experience was, what my thoughts were when I was knitting this, and how I may adjust accordingly for future projects. I don't know what I'm going to use this yarn for, but like I said, let me know in the comments if you feel strongly about a certain pattern or how you would use this yarn to repurpose it for something that you would love. I mean, we're different people, so you might love something different than I would love, but I don't know. Maybe you know my style. I think I would like a cardigan that has not too much positive ease, but enough positive ease that I can button it comfortably without bunching and the fear of buttons popping off. Because, you know, if you've been watching, you know by now that is, for whatever reason, a fear I have. I've never had this happen to me, but I don't know. It's something that happens in cartoons and therefore could also happen to me. Whatever. Okay, so in my anxiousness over the last talking point I had about size inclusivity, I totally moved forward with closing out this FO diary without including arguably the most important section of an FO diary, which is whether or not I recommend this pattern to you. I gotta say, this is a really well written pattern. My fit issues aside, and that section where I wanted a little bit more direction, that brioche left front section, I think this is a really well written pattern. Claire has a lot of helpful guidance for you as you're working your way through the pattern. I've already kind of, touched on the things that I would change as far as schematic goes, but I think that this is really well organized, really well written. There are also, aside from the color coding that I mentioned earlier, which is super, super helpful, there are a few different charts in the pattern. For instance, when you are about to move on to the body, there is a chart that tells you where you should be if you want to have waist shaping versus not waist shaping. I did not do waist shaping on my cardigan. And there's also a chart before you separate for the armhole and sleeves that tells you exactly what your stitch count should be across the whole garment, and then isolated to the button band, the left front, the left shoulder seam, the back, the right shoulder seam, the right front, and the right button band. So I think Claire has done a really good and comprehensive job of making it so the people knitting her pattern can have checkpoints to make sure that they're on the right track. I just wish that the fit would be a little different. So, would I recommend this pattern? Yes, I would, if you want a cardigan with this fit and with this shaping. It's very much a triangle shape from the top of the neck to the end of the yoke. So if that is a good fit for you and you like that, that's your preference, then by all means knit this pattern. But I would not recommend this pattern to you if you don't prefer a fit as it lays with that triangle shaping, if that makes sense. So really look at the pattern photos, really look at the project photos on Ravelry, and make sure that this is something that you want to move forward with knowingly before you cast on. Okay, well, that's it. I hope that you have a great day. I hope you're knitting something that you're loving and that it turns into something that you love wearing. And that's it. I have a lot of other projects that I'm working on the needles that hopefully will become FO Diary installments for you in the coming months. But until then, I hope that you enjoy my other videos and that you have a great day. All right, so that's all I have for this video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you don't already, and hit that notification bell to be notified of my next upload. Last but not least, head over to Instagram and follow me at Rachel is Knitting if you don't already. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.